The distress beacon had been broadcasting for 11 minutes. In 11 minutes, the Valkyrie colony ship Endless Mercy had lost its engines, its secondary hull, and 412 crew members. The surviving 300 were sealed in emergency compartments, breathing recycled air that tasted like burnt copper and old fear. Commander Isel Vaughn had sent the beacon on every frequency the Galactic Coalition recognized. Medical emergency. Hostile engagement. Civilian vessel under attack. She had not specified which frequency to exclude. That was the mistake. Or maybe it wasn't a mistake at all. That part would take her a long time to figure out. The pirates, Caith-class marauders, 3 ships, guns already warm, were taking their time. They always took their time with Valkyrie vessels. The Valkyrie were known for 2 things across the galaxy: exceptional diplomatic records and the biological constitution of a ripe piece of fruit. No clothes, no venom, no redundant organ systems. Skeletons that fractured under pressures most species considered a firm handshake. The Caith hadn't even bothered to scramble their targeting. There was no rush. There never was. Isel Vaughn was watching the sensor display when the first contact appeared on long range. Then a second. Then 17 more. Then the sensor array started doing something she had never seen it do in 12 years of deep space service. It started buffering. There were too many signals coming in for the system to categorize them individually. It was trying. It kept trying. Little spinning indicator. Little desperate machine doing its best. She leaned forward. Read the initial classification tag the system managed to spit out before it gave up entirely. Species: human, vessel class, unclassified, armament level, data overflow error. Isel Vaughn had met 3 humans in her life. One was a trade negotiator who apologized compulsively and ate protein bars for every meal. One was a xenobiologist who cried openly when she described the Valkyrie bioluminescent mating display and called it the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. One drove a cargo hauler and communicated almost exclusively in gestures. None of them had seemed particularly lethal. The Caith lead ship opened a channel to whatever was incoming. Standard intimidation protocol. Turn around. This sector is claimed. You do not want this confrontation. The response that came back was not in any language Isel Vaughn's translator recognized. It was not, she would later learn, a language at all. It was a very old Earth phrase rendered in tonal frequencies humans used between warships when they did not want civilians to hear what they were saying. The Caith lead ship went silent. Then, all 3 Caith ships began broadcasting emergency retreat signals simultaneously, which was notable because the Caith did not retreat. The Caith had not retreated from anything in recorded galactic history. There were Caith cultural proverbs specifically about this. Isel Vaughn watched them run. Then, she turned back to the sensor display, which had finally finished buffering, and read the full classification report on the 23 vessels now holding position between her broken ship and the space where the pirates used to be. She read it twice. Then, she did something the Valkyrie considered deeply inappropriate in a professional setting. She laughed, because the galaxy had rules about distress beacons and frequencies and who responded to what, and she had broken every single one of them by accident, and apparently the universe had decided that her mistake deserved not a rescue shuttle, but the single most terrifying fleet of human warships that had been deployed outside soul space in 60 years. 300 survivors, 1 crippled colony ship, 23 human vessels, each one classified in the Coalition database under a category that did not officially exist, crewed by a species that had spent most of its galactic tenure making everyone else deeply reconsider their priors about what dangerous actually meant. Coming to help, she opened a channel. Try to think of the right thing to say. So the only honest thing. We did not expect you. The response came back in perfect, unaccented Valkyrie, warm as a hearth fire, completely at ease, like 23 warships arriving uninvited to someone else's crisis was just a Tuesday. Nobody ever does. Sit tight. We've got you. This is the story of what happened next. It is a story about backup, about what that word means when humans are the ones who show up. About 300 survivors who asked for help and got something the galaxy hadn't seen in a generation. It did not go the way anyone expected. It almost never does. Commander Isilvan had been in space long enough to know that distress beacons were not magic. They were radio waves. They traveled at the speed of light, which sounded impressive until you remembered how much space existed between one point and any other point that might conceivably help you. 11 minutes of broadcasting meant the signal had reached, at best, a handful of relay stations and whatever happened to be passing within a light hour of the Endless Mercy's position. The math was not encouraging. The math had never been encouraging. Isilvan had done the math in her head the moment she authorized the beacon, and then she had put it away because dwelling on math in a crisis was the kind of thing that got commanders found curled in a corner by their crew. The crew needed to see her standing. So she stood. The Endless Mercy was a colony transport, not a warship, had never been a warship, was about as much a warship as a large metal building that someone had attached engines to. It carried soil processors, seed banks, medical fabricators, and the personal effects of 312 Valkyrie families who had spent their life savings on a transit permit to the Vale 3 agricultural settlement. It carried no weapons. It carried one small emergency defense array that was technically supposed to emit a deterrent signal and had, upon activation, emitted a noise that one of the engineers described as a very large door creaking. The Caith Marauders had not been deterred. They had, if anything, seemed amused. 412 dead. Isilvan did not look at that number on the display. She would look at it later. Later was a place she could afford emotions. Here was not. Here was 3 Caith ships sitting at comfortable firing range, taking apart the Endless Mercy's hull in the way a child takes apart a toy, not because they needed to, but because the taking apart was enjoyable. The Caith were not particularly organized, as pirates went. They were not particularly strategic. What they were was large, well-armed, and operating in a stretch of space that the Galactic Coalition had classified as low-priority patrol territory for the last 8 years, which was Coalition speak for we don't go there much, and neither should you. The Valkyrie went there because the soil was good and the permits were cheap. Nobody had told the families in the seed bank compartments about the patrol classification. Or if they had, the cheap permits had been more persuasive. Isilvan watched the Caith. She watched the sensor display. She watched the beacon counter tick upward, 12 minutes, 13, 14, and she thought about the frequencies she had checked before authorizing transmission. The Coalition Standard Emergency Bands. The Valkyrie Diplomatic Emergency Channel. The Universal Medical Distress Frequency, which was supposed to be monitored by every register vessel in Coalition space, and which, in practice, was monitored by whoever happened to have their comms on. She had not checked the human reach frequency. She had not unchecked it either. It was simply there in the list of available emergency bands, and she had selected all active frequencies because she was a person trying not to die, and granular frequency management had not seemed like the priority. In 15 minutes, she would understand that this was the most consequential navigation decision she had ever made. The sensor display buffered. Isilvan blinked at it. In 12 years, she had never seen the sensor display buffer. It was a military-grade system, Coalition certified, rated for simultaneous tracking of up to 2,000 individual contacts. She watched the little indicator spin. She watched the classification engine try and fail to parse what it was seeing. She watched the system produce 3 partial contact reports and then emit in the corner of the display a small status note she had also never seen before. Contact volume exceeds display parameters. Rendering subset, * 23 vessels. That was the subset. That was what the system could manage to show her while it worked on the rest of the data. 23 contacts, all coming from the same bearing, all at speeds that the display kept trying to recalculate because the initial figures looked like sensor errors. They were not sensor errors. The full classification tag loaded 3 minutes later. By then, the Caith had already noticed the incoming contacts and had opened a hailing frequency, the standard territorial warning, the one every pirate faction used in this sector, the one that had worked without exception for the 8 years the Coalition had been under patrolling this space. Isilvan could not hear what the human sent back. The response came on a frequency her system flagged as encrypted, military intervessel, unauthorized civilian intercept. What she could hear was the Kaith response, which was silence, and then the sound of 3 sets of engines spinning up to emergency burn simultaneously. She watched them go. She read the full classification report. Species, human. Vessel class, multiple. Destroyer X8, heavy cruiser X6, carrier X3, classification pending X6. Fleet designation, unregistered. Armament level, restricted data. Last known deployment, classified. Crew complement, estimated 12,000 to 18,000. Alert status, active combat configuration, asterisk active combat configuration. They had arrived in active combat configuration. They had not arrived the way a rescue vessel arrives. Lights comm, transponder broadcasting, medical team assembled. They had arrived the way a thing arrives that has done this before, that knows what this looks like from a long way out, that had read the frequencies and made a calculation and then moved before Isilvan had finished doing her math. She opened a channel. So the only honest thing, we did not expect you. The voice that came back was human. She could tell from the register, the particular cadence, the way it didn't quite fit any single emotional category she had a word for in Valkyrie. Warm and dry at the same time. Certain without being cold. Nobody ever does. Sit tight. We've got you. Then the 23 ships began to move, and Isilvan learned for the first time what it looked like when humans decided something was their problem now. The fleet's designation, she learned in the next 20 minutes, was the 14th Expeditionary. It was not an active coalition fleet. It had not been an active coalition fleet for 6 years, since the end of the Reach conflict, since the ceasefire treaties that everyone in the galaxy had been relieved about for different reasons, and which the humans had signed with the particular expression of people who were agreeing to stop doing something they were very good at, because continuing to do it had become socially unacceptable. The 14th had been officially decommissioned. Its ships had been officially placed in reserve. The humans had a category for ships that were decommissioned and in reserve. It was called Ready Reserve, and what it meant in practice was that the ships were maintained to active deployment standards, crewed by skeleton crews of specialists, equipped to full operational load, and capable of mobilizing to full combat readiness within 72 hours of an authorization signal. The authorization signal for the 14th had come from a human admiral named Petra Solano, who had received the Endless Mercy's distress beacon on a personal monitoring system. She ran from her retirement home on a station called Meridian 7 because she had never quite stopped monitoring, and who had made 3 calls in 12 minutes. One to the 14TH's reserve coordinator, one to a logistics depot that owed her a favor, and one to a person whose name and title Isilvan would not learn for. Another 3 days. 72 hours was the standard. The 14th had mobilized in 41. Isilvan learned this from Lieutenant Commander Hara Osei, who arrived aboard the Endless Mercy with a medical team of 22, a portable hull patch system, and an expression of someone who had been awake for approximately 2 days and had decided that coffee would have to do the work that sleep was not available to do. Osei was tall in the way that humans were sometimes tall. Not elegantly tall, not the elongated grace of the Valkyrie, but tall like a thing that had been built for utility and had kept growing past the specifications. She moved through the emergency corridors of the Endless Mercy with the complete spatial confidence of someone who had done medical operations in worse spaces than this, which Isilvan found both reassuring and faintly alarming. 412 casualties, Osei said. Not a question. She had already read the ship's logs on approach. Yes. Osei nodded once. Wrote something on the tablet she was carrying. We've got a trauma team in Bay 3 of the Andromache. Anyone in critical who can be moved safely, I want them over within the hour. The ones who can't be moved, my team stays here. She paused, looked at Isilvan with an assessment that was not unkind but was also not soft. You, when did you last eat? Isilvan opened her mouth. That's what I thought. Someone bring the commander something with calories in it. This was directed at a crew member behind her who had apparently been anticipating exactly this category of order, because a ration pack appeared in Isilvan's hands approximately 3 seconds later. Eat. You're not going to help your crew by running your blood sugar into the floor. Isilvan looked at the ration pack. Looked at Osei. Your fleet. There are 6 ships in your formation with no classification in the Coalition database. Eat first. I'm trying to understand what is happening. Those are 2 separate sentences, and you can do the second one while doing the first one. Osei's voice was not harsh. It was the voice of someone who had managed a great number of crises and had learned that the most useful thing you could do for a commander in shock was give them a small concrete task and make sure they completed it. Eat. Then, ask your questions. Usilvan ate. It tasted like salt and compressed protein, and she did not notice because she was already thinking about the 6 unclassified ships, which were sitting in formation at the edge of the fleet's position, running no transponders, their hull classifications obscured by some kind of electromagnetic profile. She had never seen a civilian vessel run. She had seen military vessels run it. Once, in archive footage from the Reach conflicts. She swallowed. Said those ships. The 6. Osei stopped writing. The change was small. The tablet lowered a centimeter. The pen stopped moving. But Isilvan had been reading people for long enough to know that a person who stopped moving had started calculating. Those ships, Osei said carefully, are here because Admiral Solano asked them to be. That's the full answer I have. She looked at Isilvan. The longer answer is above my clearance level and probably yours, and I'd recommend leaving it there. Isilvan thought about the Kaith retreating. 3 Kaith ships, armed, experienced, aggressive by species-wide inclination, running from something they had seen on a sensor display without firing a single shot. She thought about what could make a Kaith run without fighting. She put the thought somewhere quiet and closed the door on it. Osei was right. Some answers were above her clearance level, and pressing them was the kind of thing that got you answers you then had to carry. The families, she said instead. The ones in the sealed compartments. They have children. Osei's expression shifted. Not much. But Isilvan caught it. The small tightening around the eyes that humans did when something landed, and they were choosing not to show it landing. I know, Osei said. Tell me which compartments. We'll do children first. The Endless Mercy had 9 sealed emergency compartments. 5 were in the forward section. 3 were in the mid-section, which had taken the worst of the Kaith's hull fire, and which the Endless Mercy's structural integrity system was currently describing in terms that Isilvan's engineering team had asked the system to stop using because the crew in those compartments had access to the ship's internal announcement system, and panic was not helpful. The 9th compartment was the bridge auxiliary, where Isilvan's senior staff were waiting for her to tell them what was happening. The human medical teams moved through the forward compartments with a systematic efficiency that Isilvan found herself watching between her own tasks, unable to fully look away. They did not waste motion. They communicated in short bursts, half in language and half in gestures that seemed to have meanings she wasn't fluent in, moving around each other in spaces that were not designed for them. The Endless Mercy was built to Valkyrie proportions, slightly narrower than humans preferred, with lower overhead clearance in the service corridors, without complaint. One of the human medics was too tall for the service corridor by about 15 centimeters, and dealt with this by walking in a permanent, unhurried half-crouch that looked like it should have been uncomfortable, and that he appeared to find completely unremarkable. She stopped to watch one of them with a child. A Valkyrie girl, maybe 8 years old, sitting in the corner of the second forward compartment, holding a stuffed toy in the shape of a deep-water animal from the Valkyrie homeworld. A Miru, round and luminescent in better circumstances, currently drooping in a way that matched its owner's posture. The medic, young, female, the kind of human face that had freckles across the nose and cheeks, sat down on the floor across from the child without hesitation. Not kneeling. Sitting. Getting herself deliberately lower than the child's eye level. She said something in Valkyrie that was grammatically imperfect and charmingly earnest. Your Miru is a very good Miru. I also had one. Mine was she paused, clearly searching for a word she didn't have, and then fell back on the human equivalent, a stuffed bear. Brown. His name was Gerald. The child looked at the medic, looked at her Miru, said, "Gerald is a strange name for a bear." I was 4. My naming instincts were not at their peak. A silence. The child pulled the Miru slightly closer. "Then, is my mother in this section?" "She's in section 5, the medic said. "She's okay. We're going to take you to her." Isilvan turned away, focused on her tablet, did not name what was happening in her chest, because they were still in the middle of a crisis, and she had made herself a promise about emotions, and later. Later was coming. She could feel it. She just needed to hold the line a little longer. 6 hours after the 14th Expeditionary arrived, the Endless Mercy had been patched to minimal structural integrity. Its survivors had been triaged and treated, and Isilvan was sitting in her command chair with a second ration pack she didn't remember accepting, looking at the sensor display, which was now functioning normally and showing her 23 human ships in clean formation around her vessel, like a fence made of things that could destroy small moons. She opened a channel to the Andromache, which was the 14th's flagship, a heavy cruiser, long and dark and built like a thought about violence that someone had made permanent in metal. "This is Commander Isilvan. I would like to speak with whoever is in command." A pause. Then, "This is Captain Dakarai Minsa, Andromache." "Commander, how are your people?" "Alive." She hesitated. "More alive than they were 7 hours ago. Because of your fleet. That's what we showed up for." She looked at the sensor display, at the 23 ships, at the 6 without transponders, sitting quiet at the edge of formation like a thought you couldn't quite catch. "Captain, I need to ask you something directly." "Go ahead." The Kaith left without engaging. 3 armed marauders. They ran. A pause that was 2 seconds too long to be casual. "Yes," Minsa said. "What did you say to them?" Another pause. She could hear something in it. Not evasion, exactly. More like a person choosing between 2 true answers and picking the one that fit better in this particular conversation. "We didn't say much," Minsa said finally. "We broadcast a fleet identification signal. Standard procedure." "Standard procedure," Isilvan repeated. "Yes." And they ran from a fleet identification signal. "Commander." The warmth in Minsa's voice did not change. "There are some things in the Coalition database that every species can access. The 14th's deployment record is one of them. If you look it up, you'll have your answer." She looked it up. She sat with the answer for a long time. Then she closed the channel, put her ration pack down, and looked out at the 23 ships keeping vigil around her broken vessel, and thought, nobody ever does. Nobody ever expected this. And she understood, sitting there in the quiet hum of a ship that was still alive because of a frequency she hadn't meant to check, that the galaxy had a category for things like the 14th Expeditionary, and the category was not military fleet, and it was not rescue force, and it was not any of the clean official words in the Coalition database. The category was the reason certain species had stopped doing certain things. She was looking at it. 23 ships. Active combat configuration. History that made Kaith pirates turn around without a single shot. Come to help a colony transport full of families because a distress beacon had gone out on all frequencies, and humans apparently did not differentiate between their emergency and someone else's emergency in any way that mattered when there were children in the compartments. She ate the rest of her ration pack. Thought about Lieutenant Commander Osei, asking when she'd last eaten. Thought about a medic sitting on the floor to get below a child's eye level. Thought about Gerald the bear. Thought about 23 warships and what they had cost to build and what they had been built to do, and the gap between those two things and what they were currently doing, holding a quiet perimeter around a seed bank colony transport, running long-range scans, making sure nothing else came in the dark. Later arrived. She led it. The Coalition response came 14 hours late. Not 14 hours after the distress beacon. 14 hours after the 14th Expeditionary had already arrived, patched the Endless Mercy's hull, treated its wounded, stabilized its surviving crew, and settled into a quiet protective formation that showed no signs of going anywhere. 14 hours after the Caith had run. 14 hours after everything that needed doing had been done by people who had not been asked to do it. The Coalition patrol vessel Serenai arrived at the edge of sensor range, ran a sweep, went very still for a moment that Isilvan imagined was a pilot looking at his display, and then looking at it again, and then opened a channel. Asterisk Endless Mercy asterisk. This is Coalition patrol vessel Serenai, responding to your distress beacon. We are, a pause, assessing the situation. Can you confirm your status and the identity of the vessels in your current position? Isilvan opened the response channel. This is Commander Isilvan. Our status is stable. The vessels in formation are the 14th Expeditionary Human Reach. They arrived approximately 14 hours ago and have been providing medical assistance and structural support. The pause this time was longer. The 14th, Serenai's pilot said, in the way someone says a thing when they have heard it correctly and still need a moment to locate their reaction to it. Yes, the 14th Expeditionary. As in, Isilvan said. She heard something that might have been the Serenai's pilot exhaling. Understood. We will hold position and await further orders. She closed the channel, looked at Captain Mintz's last message, sitting open on her secondary display. He had sent it 3 hours ago. A quiet operational update. Matter of fact. Hull integrity was holding at 62%, which was sufficient for a slow transit to the nearest station with a full repair dock. The critical patients had been stabilized aboard the Andromache's medical bay. 2 of the families from Compartment 3 had asked if they could send something to the human crew as a thank you, and he had gently suggested that wasn't necessary, but if they insisted, his crew had not. Complained about Valkyrie spice bread when they'd encountered it during the Reach conflict era. She had sent spice bread, 8 loaves from the ship's food fabricator because it was the only thing she could do, and she was a person who needed to be able to do something. He had sent back a single line. Asterisk the crew says thank you. Engineering deck is asking if it's possible to replicate the recipe. I told them to ask nicely and not to be weird about it. Asterisk Isilvan had read that message 4 times. She was not entirely certain why. The Coalition's formal response to the situation arrived not in the form of a patrol vessel, but in the form of a signal, a tight beam communication sent to the Endless Mercy directly, flagged urgent and diplomatic, and 3 other categories that meant read this before you say anything else to anyone. The signal was from Ambassador Tyrith Sol, the Valkyrie diplomatic liaison, to the Coalition's Emergency Coordination Office, and it contained, in diplomatic language that had been polished to a point where the actual meaning required some excavation, the following information. The Coalition was aware of the 14th Expeditionary's presence. The Coalition was grateful for their assistance. The Coalition was also, in a carefully worded way that used the phrase jurisdictional considerations 4 times, very interested in understanding why a decommissioned human reserve fleet had mobilized without Coalition authorization and was currently sitting in Coalition-monitored space with 6 vessels of unregistered classification. The Coalition would like this explained, diplomatically, without making anything worse. Isilvan read the signal twice. Identified the part where it was asking her to serve as an intermediary. Identified the part where it was asking her to do this without provoking anyone. Identified the part where it was very much not asking her to take sides, but was also reading carefully, absolutely asking her to take sides. She opened a channel to Captain Mintza. I have received a diplomatic communication from the Coalition. I expected you might, Mintza said. He sounded unsurprised in the way that suggested he had not only expected it, but had a rough sense of what it contained. They want to understand the mobilization, the authorization, the 6 unregistered vessels. Understandable. They want me to facilitate the conversation. A pause. She heard something move in the background of the channel. Something that sounded like a command deck, the particular ambient sound of a lot of people working in the same space with focused competence. Commander, Mintza said, I want to be direct with you. I'm going to tell you some things, and I'm going to ask you to decide what to do with them. You can tell the Coalition everything I say. I'm not going to ask you to edit it." She straightened slightly in her chair. "Go ahead." The 14th was mobilized by Admiral Petra Solano, retired, who monitors the humanitarian emergency frequencies from Meridian 7 and who has the authority, under a human reach internal defense protocol, to recall a reserve fleet to active status in response to a confirmed humanitarian emergency. The distress beacon from the Endless Mercy constituted a confirmed humanitarian emergency. She exercised that authority. The Coalition was not notified before mobilization. Correct. The protocol doesn't require Coalition notification. It requires confirmation of emergency status and authorization from a flag officer. Both were satisfied. Isilvan thought about that. The Coalition is going to want to know why the protocol doesn't require their notification. For a fleet of this size, the Coalition is going to want to know a lot of things. Mincer agreed, with the patience of someone who had had this conversation before or had anticipated having it, and made peace with that anticipation. The honest answer is that the protocol was written during the Reach conflicts, when Coalition response times were insufficient. It was written by people who had watched insufficient response times produce specific outcomes and had decided they were not willing to repeat the experiment. Isilvan was quiet for a moment. The 6 unregistered ships. Also not something I can give you a Coalition-friendly explanation for. Can you give me any explanation? The pause that followed was not evasion. It was the pause of a person measuring something. What was safe to say, what was true, what the person asking could carry. They're here because certain things in this sector have been escalating, Minsa said finally. The Caith activity, the frequency, the targets. There's a pattern that the Coalition's analysis is about 18 months behind on, and the people who track these things for the Reach have been watching it. When the Endless Mercy's signal came in, it wasn't just a humanitarian emergency. It was a data point in a pattern. He paused. The 6 ships are the part of this fleet that exists to respond to patterns. Isilvan looked at the sensor display, at the 6 dark shapes at the edge of formation. What does responding to a pattern look like? In this case, it looked like being here when the Caith ran their identification check on our fleet registry and got a specific result. They ran a check on your registry. Every ship does when they encounter an unknown fleet. It's standard procedure. And the result, Minsa said carefully, told them some things about who we were that made this sector of space feel like somewhere they didn't want to be. He paused. I can't give you the specifics, but the Caith have a long institutional memory. Certain designations in certain registries are, he chose the word deliberately, instructive. Isilvan had read the 14th's deployment record. She had read it, and then she had read the parts of the Reach Conflicts archive that the Coalition made publicly available, and then she had read the parts of her own species' diplomatic archive that referenced the Reach Conflicts, and she had found a single entry under an engagement designation she didn't recognize that said, Astra's Human Force, engagement terminated, adversarial withdrawal. No further engagement sought. Reason, classified, diplomatic sensitivity level 4 star. Level 4 diplomatic sensitivity was reserved for things the Coalition had decided no species needed to think about too carefully. Captain, she said. Commander, the Coalition is going to ask me what I think happened here. Officially. And what do you think happened? She looked out at the formation. At 23 ships that had arrived faster than anything should have been able to arrive, in active combat configuration, and resolve a crisis that had been killing her people without firing a single weapon. I think, she said slowly, that a retired admiral on a space station was monitoring the right frequencies and moved faster than the Coalition's response system, and called in a fleet that didn't exist on paper, and that 3 pirate ships ran from your registry without engagement, because your registry contains information that makes running seem like the intelligent choice. She paused. And I think that 6 ships in your formation are carrying something that I am, for the first time in my professional life, choosing not to ask about. Minsa was quiet for a moment. That's a very accurate summary. What would you like me to tell the Coalition? Tell them the truth, he said. We were monitoring the frequencies. We received the beacon. We responded under human reach humanitarian protocol. We are happy to facilitate any coalition review of our actions. A pause. Tell them also that the Endless Mercy is in our protection until it reaches a repair dock, and that we will be conducting a sector sweep before we leave because the cave pattern suggests this was not an isolated incident. They won't like that last part. No, he agreed. But they'll like the alternative less. The Coalition Review representative arrived 2 days later on a fast courier ship. A Drenali named Counselor Vethorin, who was known in diplomatic circles as someone who managed difficult situations with exceptional bureaucratic stamina and the negotiating instincts of a species that had evolved in an environment where being wrong meant being eaten. Vethorin had not encountered humans directly before. Isilvan could tell because of the way he moved when he came aboard the Endless Mercy for the preliminary meeting, with the careful, calibrated courtesy of a person who had been briefed on a species without meeting one, who knew all the relevant facts, and was in the process of discovering that facts and presence were different things. She had arranged the meeting in the Endless Mercy's main conference room. Minsa had come aboard personally. He was taller than she had expected, a dark-skinned man in his 50s with the particular quality of stillness that she had noticed in other humans who had been in the military for a long time, as if they had learned to be quiet in their bodies, so the loudness could be elsewhere. He wore his rank insignia, and nothing else that signaled anything, which she suspected was deliberate. Vethorin shook his hand, assessed him with the Drenali diplomat's characteristic efficiency. Captain Minsa, I represent the Coalition Emergency Coordination Office. I've been asked to conduct a preliminary review of the 14th Expeditionary's mobilization. Counselor, Minsa's voice was pleasant. We're glad to cooperate. The Coalition's primary concern is the mobilization protocol, specifically the authorization chain and the question of Coalition notification. I've prepared a full document review for you. Everything within the unclassified portion of the mobilization record. Minsa set a data chip on the table. The authorization is sound. I think you'll find that when you read it, the Coalition's position is that a fleet of this size operating in Coalition-monitored space rescued 300 civilians, Minsa said. Still pleasant. Not interrupting exactly, but the sentence landed at the precise moment it needed to, with the precision of a person who had learned to place words, including 84 children. Vethorin paused. The Coalition does not dispute the humanitarian outcome. Good. Then, we agree on the most important part. Isilvan watched Vethorin process this. The way a diplomat processes a negotiating partner who is agreeable, cooperative, and somehow still immovable. It was the human quality she kept returning to, the one she had not been prepared for. The warmth was real. The help was real. And underneath it, running quiet and very deep, something that did not move at all. She thought about what Minsa had said about the Caith running. She thought about what was in a fleet registry that made 3 armed pirate ships choose not to fight. She decided again not to ask. The sector sweep started on day 3. The 6 unregistered ships moved first, pulling out of formation in a pattern that Isilvan's sensor display characterized in its new and apparently permanent state of extended vocabulary as tactical dispersal. Formation type, classified. They spread across a volume of space that took her breath away, not because it was large, but because the spread was so precise, so coordinated, so obviously the product of having done this particular thing a very specific number of times before. Nothing in that volume of space was going to go unexamined. She watched them work. She did not ask what they were looking for. She had a reasonable understanding of what they were looking for. She had read the Caith attack log from the last 14 months, which were part of the Coalition's public incident database, and she had seen the pattern that Minsa had mentioned, the one the Coalition was 18 months behind on, and she did not need to be a military analyst to see it. Someone was coordinating the Caith. The frequency, the targets, the specific selection of under-patrol corridors, these were not random. The Caith were opportunistic by nature, and they had been given a very specific set of opportunities in a very specific geographic pattern. Someone was pointing them at things. She didn't know what the 6 ships were going to find. She suspected, sitting in her command chair watching the sweep, that she was not going to be told what they found. She suspected that what they found was going to go into a report that existed somewhere in the Human Reaches classified system, and was going to produce consequences she would not see clearly until later. She thought about the word later and what it meant now, after the night she had spent letting the grief in. 412 names. She had read them all. She had said each one out loud, alone, in her quarters, because her culture required it, and because she was a commander, and this was the thing commanders did with the names they carried. After the 412, she had sat for a long time, and then she had gotten up and gone back to work. The work was the thing. It had always been the thing. You carried the names, and you kept going. On the sensor display, 23 ships and 300 surviving people, and a sector sweep that was quietly, without announcement, making this piece of space into somewhere that certain things would not happen for a long time. She opened a channel. Captain Mensa, Commander, when the sweep is complete. When you... She paused, finding the word, leave. What happens to this corridor? A pause that was not calculating anything, but was, she thought, feeling its way towards something honest. The Coalition will reclassify the patrol priority, he said. They've already started the paperwork. And the Kaith, another pause, will have learned something from their sensor logs today. About who uses this route now. About who noticed the pattern. And the 6 ships. What they found will be handled, Mensa said simply. Not evasive. Conclusive, in the way that meant this matter will be resolved, and I'm telling you that so you can stop carrying it. She sat with that for a moment. There are families on this ship, she said, who still won't get a Veil 3. The settlement. The reason they left home. I know. They're asking me if it's safe. A long pause. Outside, the 6 ships moved in their precise, classified pattern through the dark. Tell them, Mensa said, that it will be. Give us a few more days. She believed him. She was not certain she should believe him on the basis of 3 days of acquaintance and a fleet she didn't fully understand. She believed him anyway. A few more days, she said. We have spice bread. The warmth in his voice was real. She had stopped being surprised by that. Then, we're in no hurry. On the 4th day, they found the station. It was not on any Coalition chart. It was not transmitting any identification signal. It was tucked into the debris field of a dead planetoid 3 light hours off the standard transit corridor, running minimum power and, from the outside, looking very much like a piece of the debris field it was sitting in, which was not an accident. Which was not the work of the Kaith, who did not have the engineering capacity for that kind of deliberate camouflage, and which told a specific and unpleasant story about who was actually behind what had been happening in this corridor. One of the 6 unregistered ships found it. Isilvan knew this because the sweep pattern changed. She watched it on her display, the ship's positions shifting in a way that was not random, tightening around a point she could barely resolve on her sensor range. She knew something had been found before anyone told her, because of the change in formation. The change was small. It was also, to someone who had been watching these ships for 4 days, absolutely unmistakable. Mensa called her 30 minutes later. We found something, he said. I could see the pattern shift. A pause that held something she recognized now as his version of being impressed, which was quiet and did not announce itself. We found a station. Unregistered. Kaith traffic logs suggest they've been using it for coordination and logistics for approximately 22 months. 22 months. The attack frequency had spiked 20 months ago. The timeline fitted together with the satisfaction of a thing that had always been true, clicking into a shape that made sense. Who built it? She said. That, Mensa said carefully, is what we're currently determining. But you have a hypothesis. A pause. We have more than a hypothesis. We have identifying markers in the station's construction profile that match a known contractor. Coalition registered, which is going to make the next conversation with Counselor Vethorin interesting. Isilvan set her tablet down. A Coalition-registered contractor built an unregistered coordination station for Kaith pirates in an under-patrol corridor. That is what the evidence suggests. And The Caith were being given targets. The station's database contains route information, scheduled data, and ship profiles for every civilian vessel that has transited this corridor in the last 18 months. Specific vessels, with notes on cargo value and crew composition. A pause. The Endless Mercy is in the database. Route, schedule, cargo manifest. Annotated. She was quiet for long enough that Minsa said her name. "I'm here," she said. "I'm processing." 412 names. Someone had looked at a database entry. Route, schedule, cargo manifest, and pointed Caith pirates at her ship. Not randomly, not opportunistically, with planning and logistics and a coalition-registered contractor's construction profile. She picked up her tablet. Put down again. What happens to the station? We've already contacted coalition enforcement with the evidence package. Counselor Vethorin is aware. A pause. The station is not going to be a problem after today. And the contractor, Coalition Enforcement et Juridiction. We've made sure the evidence is clean and complete. Isilvan thought about what clean and complete meant in the context of a fleet that had found an unregistered station in a debris field, processed its databases, and packaged the evidence for a legal process, all before her morning briefing. "You've done this before," she said. "Found things like this?" "Yes. And the 6 ships. This is," she gestured at her display, at the Titan formation, the thing she could see without being told. "This is what they're for." Minsa didn't answer immediately. When he did, it was not an evasion and was not a confirmation and somehow managed to be both. "The 14th has capabilities that are suited to finding things that don't want to be found," he said. "That's part of why the reserve protocol exists. Some things require," he chose the word with care, "specific tools." She thought about the Caith running. She thought about tactical dispersal, formation type, classified. She thought about a fleet registry that made certain species make certain choices. "Captain," she said, "I want to ask you something, and I want an honest answer, not a diplomatic one." "All right. The 6 ships, the classified formation, the tools that find things that don't want to be found." She looked at her display, at the 23 ships that had spent 4 days making her surviving crew feel safe in a way she had not expected to feel again this quickly. What am I supposed to do with knowing that those things exist? A long pause. Not calculating, not managing, actually thinking. "I think," Minsa said finally, "that knowing those things exist is actually the point." The Caith knew. That's why they ran. Knowing is deterrence. It's what makes this corridor safer for the next ship. And the one after that. He paused. What you do with that knowledge is exactly what you did. You were honest about it. You asked the questions. You decided what to put down and what to carry. And the questions I decided to put down are also the right call, he said. There's a reason certain information is classified. It's not always because of what it would tell enemies. Sometimes it's because of what carrying full knowledge of certain things does to the people who care about them. A pause. You're a good commander. Good commanders know what they need to carry and what they can set down without shame. She sat with that for a while. Outside, the sweep continued. The formation had tightened further around the debris field, a circle of dark ships around a thing that had been hidden and was now found. Counselor Vethorin called for a joint meeting that afternoon. He came aboard the Endless Mercy again. She had the sense that the choice of location was deliberate on his part, that a Drenali diplomat choosing to have difficult conversations on a Valkyrie ship rather than a human one was a small claim of procedural ground, and settled into the conference room with his tablet open, and his expression doing the careful neutral thing that diplomats used when they were sitting with information they did not yet know how to categorize. Minsa arrived with Lieutenant Commander Osei and a legal officer named Lieutenant Breyer Solano. No relation to the Admiral, he had clarified when Isilvan raised her eyebrow at the name, who was carrying a document case, and had the particular focus calm of someone who had prepared for multiple versions of this conversation and was ready for any of them. "The station," Vethorin said, once everyone was seated. "The station," Minsa agreed. "The evidence package you transmitted to enforcement is thorough. Vethorin turned his tablet toward the room. On the screen was a file index. It was extensive. The contractor identification is confirmed. The database contents are being analyzed by the enforcement office. The coalition is he paused. The careful, neutral expression shifted slightly into something that was not embarrassment, but was adjacent to it. The expression of a bureaucracy encountering evidence of its own gaps. We are concerned. Understandably, Minsa said. The contractor is registered. Coalition Vited has been operating under coalition licensing for 11 years. The station's construction matches their materials and methods at a level that our forensic engineers describe as unambiguous. Vethorin set his tablet down. Someone in our licensing and oversight process failed to notice what this contractor was building. Or noticed and chose not to document it, Lieutenant Solano said. This was said without apparent emotion, with the precision of a legal officer adding information to a record rather than making an accusation. Vethorin looked at him. That possibility is being investigated. We understand, Minsa said. We've made sure our evidence supports both lines of inquiry. The meeting continued for 2 hours. It covered the mobilization protocol, which Vethorin examined with the exhaustive thoroughness of someone who had been asked to find a problem with it, and was discovering there was not a straightforward one to find. It covered the 6 unregistered ships, which Minsa declined to address beyond a reference to classified human-reach defensive protocols, and which Vethorin accepted with the resigned posture of a person who had known this was the answer he was going to get. It covered the sector sweep, the evidence package, the recommended reclassification of the patrol priority, and the operational plan for getting the Endless Mercy to a repair dock. At the end of the 2 hours, Vethorin closed his tablet, looked at Minsa, looked at Isilvan, looked back at Minsa. I want to ask you something, he said, which surprised her because it was almost exactly the sentence she had used 4 hours ago. Go ahead, Minsa said. The Admiral, Solano. She has been monitoring the humanitarian frequencies from a retirement station for, he checked his notes, 6 years. Since she retired. Correct. She monitors them personally. Yes. Vethorin was quiet for a moment. The Coalition has automated monitoring systems for all emergency frequencies. They are functional. The response protocols are established and maintained. He paused. But an automated system does not make 3 calls in 12 minutes and mobilize a fleet in 41 hours. No, Minsa agreed. It doesn't. Why does she still watch? Vethorin said it in a way that made it clear it was not a rhetorical question. He wanted an actual answer. Minsa looked at him for a moment. Because, he said, she watched the automated system not be enough. Enough times. And she decided she wasn't going to stop watching just because she retired. The room was quiet. Isilvan thought about 412 names. About the 5 hours between the distress beacon and the 14th's arrival. 5 hours during which the Kaith had done everything they had done to her ship. She thought about what the automated system's response time would have been without Solano, without the monitoring, without 3 calls in 12 minutes. She thought about families in sealed compartments and a child with a drooping miru and a medic sitting on the floor to get below a small person's eye level. I would like, she said carefully, to send a message to Admiral Solano. Both men looked at her. I think, she said, that she should know what her watching prevented. Not as a report. As, she looked for the word, something she can carry. Minsa's expression did something she had no word for. I'll give you her contact. The Endless Mercy began its transit to the repair dock on the 5th day. The 14th Expeditionary came with it. Standard escort protocol, Minsa said, for a vessel under active protection status, which meant that 300 surviving colonists made the 2-day journey to the nearest repair station escorted by 23 human warships, which produced a reaction at the station that Isilvan observed from the bridge with something close to amusement. The station was a mid-sized commercial hub, the kind of place that processed hundreds of transits a week, operated by a rotating coalition of 3 species, managed by a Port Authority director named Overseer Pelion, who had held the position for 12 years, and who had, by his own account, seen everything. He had not seen this. The Endless Mercy emerged from transit first. Then, 23 ships of varying classifications, 6 of which the station's identification system did not have registry entries for, and was attempting to flag as unknown contacts, which triggered the station's alert protocol, which required Overseer Pelion to personally query the incoming fleet at 0300 station time, which was how Isilvan came to hear the following exchange. Incoming vessels. This is Port Authority Oversight, Velian Station. Please broadcast identification and state your purpose. And Mince's voice, warm and unhurried, the voice of a man who was aware that he had just given a station overseer a significant adrenaline event at 3 in the morning and felt gently bad about it. Port Authority Oversight. This is Captain Dakarai Minsa, NS Andromache, 14th Expeditionary. We are escorting the Endless Mercy for repairs. Civilian vessel. Attack survivor. 300 souls aboard. We'll need priority docking and a full repair assessment team. Apologies for the hour. A pause that was long enough to contain several emotions. The 14th Expeditionary. Overseer Pelion said. Yes. You're escorting a colony ship. We are. And you need priority docking, Mince said. And if the station has a children's medical facility, some of the families could use access. They've had a difficult week. Another pause. Isilvan could hear, faintly, the sound of someone typing very fast. Priority docking is, yes. Granted. Bay 7 through 12 are yours. Medical access will be, we can arrange. Pelion stopped. Restarted. Captain, is there anything else you need? A good mechanic and a cup of coffee would both be appreciated, Mensa said. We've been out a few days. Isilvan covered her mouth with her hand. It was not the appropriate response to the situation. She did it anyway. Bay 7 through 12 were the station's largest docking facilities, reserved for heavy industrial transits and official coalition vessels. The Endless Mercy docked in Bay 7, which was large enough to hold 3 of her, and the repair assessment team was waiting on the dock when the hatch opened. 7 engineers, a structural analyst, and a coalition-certified materials specialist, all of whom had been pulled from their quarters by a personal call from Overseer Pelion, who had apparently decided at some point in the last hour that he personally wanted to make sure this went right. Isilvan walked down the dock with Mensa beside her, which was the first time she had walked beside him on solid ground, rather than talking through a comm channel. And she was struck again by the quality of stillness he moved with, the particular human capacity for taking up space without requiring acknowledgement of the space they were taking up. You could have just docked us normally, she said. We could have, he agreed. The priority docking. The call from the Overseer at 0300. The colony ship with 300 survivors deserved to come in the front door, he said simply. Not the cargo entrance. She looked at him. That is not a military consideration. No, he said. It's not. She thought about that for the rest of the walk to the station's main hub, where an overseer she had never met was already there, waiting, with a look on his face that she recognized as a person who had needed to do something concrete, and had found the thing. Commander Isilvan, Pelion said, extending a hand in the multi-species greeting gesture. Your ship will be our priority. My team is the best we have. Whatever you and your crew need while you're with us, you have it. She took his hand. Thank you. He looked past her at Minsa and the human crew behind him. Something moved in his expression. Not fear, not the Catha's cold calculation. Something else. Recognition, maybe. The look of a person encountering a thing they had heard about, and finding that the hearing had not prepared them. Captain Minsa, he said, your fleet is welcome at this station. All 23 of you. Minsa smiled. We'll try not to take up too much space. Pelion made a sound that was almost a laugh. Take all the space you need. Admiral Petra Solano responded to Isilvan's message in under an hour. This was notable because of the distance between Meridian 7 and Velian Station, which should have made an under an hour response impossible, and which Isilvan filed in the growing category of things she had decided not to press on because the answer would require her to recalibrate her understanding of what was, and was not possible for a retired human admiral operating from a personal monitoring station. The message was short. It said, "Asterisk Commander, thank you for writing. I've read the incident report 3 times. I keep getting stuck on the children. I'm glad you got them out. I'm glad Mensa got to you. Take care of your people. P. Solano." Asterisk then, below the signature, a postscript. Asterisk your senior medic filed a commendation request for Lieutenant Osei. In 11 years of monitoring these frequencies, this is the second time I've received a commendation request from a person I've never met for someone they encountered during a crisis. It means she did her job the right way. I'll make sure it goes through. Asterisk Isilvan read the message twice. Thought about the commendation request she had filed the night before, sitting in her temporary quarters on Valiant Station, because it was the right thing to do, and because Osei had sat on a floor to get below a child's eye level, and that was not a thing that should go unmarked. She thought about 11 years of monitoring these frequencies. She thought about a woman who had retired, who had every reason to stop watching, who had apparently decided that her retirement was a thing that existed independently of her conscience. She sent back 3 sentences. Asterisk Admiral. The children are safe. The families are asking when they can continue to veil. 3. Asterisk the response came in 4 minutes this time. Asterisk I'm checking the route security data now. Give me 48 hours. Asterisk the Endless Mercy spent 9 days at Valiant Station. The hull repairs required 6. The remaining 3 were occupied by things that were not on the original schedule, and that Isilvan had not planned for because she had not planned for any of this and had been improvising since the moment the Kaith first fired on them. The families came off the ship. This was the part she had not anticipated. The moment when 300 people who had been in sealed compartments, surviving on recycled air and ration protein, walked out into a station's public concourse with the particular blinking, disoriented quality of people who had been in a small space for too long and were remembering that the world was larger. Parents carried children. Couples walked close. Old people moved with the careful deliberateness of bodies that had been still too long. The station's population, which was approximately 4,000 on any given day, watched them come in. And then Isilvan watched this happen from the dock entrance, leaning against a wall with a cup of something the station called tea, and which was hot and adequate. The station population did what station populations apparently do when they understand that something has happened to people who are now walking among them. They made room. They made room in the restaurants and the rest areas and the comm terminals. A Drenali family at a table in the concourse food court simply moved, wordlessly, to a smaller table and gestured a Valkyrie family with 3 small children toward the larger one. A human station worker appeared with what turned out to be a portable entertainment system for the children in the medical facility, contributed, she later learned, by the human crew currently occupying bays 10 through 12, who had passed a helmet around their common room the night before. The helmet had come back with 340 credits and a handmade card in 17 different species scripts that said, in Coalition Standard, for the little ones, get better fast, you got this. Isilvan had that card. She was going to keep it. She was standing at the dock entrance when Mensa found her, which had become, over 9 days, a pattern. He moved through the station with the same unhurried quality he moved through everything else, and he had a way of appearing in her peripheral vision at moments when she was standing somewhere and thinking something she had not finished yet. You're watching them, he said. I always watch them, she said. That's the job. He stood beside her. They both watched a grandmother sitting in a station chair with a child in her lap, the child asleep, the grandmother staring at nothing in the particular way of someone who had been afraid for a very long time and had just been allowed to stop. I sent a message to Admiral Solano, Isilvan said. I heard. He paused. What did she say? That she keeps getting stuck on the children. Isilvan looked at the grandmother, the sleeping child. I understand that. I will be stuck on them too. For a long time. The good kind or the other kind. She thought about it. Both, she said. The child with the Miru. She asked her medic if her mother was okay. She was 8 years old, and her first question was about her mother. She paused. The other kind is the 412. The ones who don't get to walk out into the concourse. Who are stuck in a number now. In a report. They're not stuck in a number for you. No, she agreed. For me, they have names. He was quiet for a moment. She had learned that his silences were not uncomfortable. They were the silences of someone who had been in the presence of grief before and understood that it did not require filling. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You never ask first," she observed. "You usually say go ahead when I ask." He acknowledged this with something that was almost a smile. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead. What are you going to tell them?" "The families. About the route to Vale 3. She exhaled slowly. "Admiral Solano is doing a security assessment. I'll have it in 48 hours. She paused. "But the real question isn't the route. The real question is whether they still want to go. Do you think they will?" She watched the grandmother in the chair, watched a couple walk past, the woman leaning slightly into the man's shoulder, the man's hand coming up without thought to cover hers. "I think," she said carefully, "that they left home for a reason, and that reason did not get killed by the Caith." She paused. "I think that for most of them, the settlement is still the plan, the life they were building toward." She looked at her hands. "I think that asking people who have survived something terrible to also abandon their future is two things too many." He was quiet. "The ones that don't want to go," she said. "I'll fight for their refund, whatever they need." She straightened slightly. "But I think most of them will go." "Vale 3 is good land," Mensa said. She looked at him. "You know it. We did a survey of that sector 2 years ago. Agricultural assessment. The soil reports are excellent." He paused. "I looked it up when your beacon came in, before we mobilized." She processed this. He had looked up the destination. Before they left, he had understood not just where they were, but where they were going. Why? He thought about it. "Because understanding what people are trying to build matters," he said. "If you know what someone is trying to get to, you understand better what losing it would cost them." She looked at him for a long time. "Captain," she said, "I want to say something, and I want you to understand I am saying it officially. As a Valkyrie colony commander, not informally." He turned to face her slightly. "Listening. When we complete repairs and continue to Vale 3, she said, "I want to request that the 14th Expeditionary escort us there. Not because I believe the route is still dangerous. I believe your sweep addressed that. I want to request it because," she paused, finding the precise formulation, the one that was true, "because the families deserve to arrive somewhere that has never hurt them, and I want the thing that is with them when they arrive to be the fleet that helped them survive." He was quiet. "I want this settlement to be associated, for them, with something that came when they needed it. I want the first sight of their new home to be preceded by 23 ships that made it possible for them to get there." She looked back at the concourse. "I want their children to grow up knowing that when the beacon went out, something came. Something real came." Mensa was very still for a moment. "I'll check with the Admiral," he said. "But, Commander, I don't think that's going to be a hard request to approve." The Admiral approved it in 6 hours. The security assessment came back positive in 39. The route had been swept, the coordinator station had been processed and handed to coalition enforcement, and the 3 Caith ships had not reappeared in any monitored sector. What had appeared in their absence was a coalition patrol reclassification notice. The corridor had been upgraded from low priority to active patrol status, effective immediately, with a fleet rotation schedule that was already being implemented. 18 months behind on the pattern. After a week, suddenly caught up. Isel Vaughn presented the assessment to the families in the station's main gathering space, a large, open room designed for events, which the station had offered at no charge for the duration of their stay, and which now held approximately 260 people who were sitting in rows, standing along the walls, holding children, holding each other, looking at her with the expressions of people who needed to be told something true. She told them the truth. All of it. The attack, the beacon, the fleet that came, the station in the debris field, and what it meant, and what had happened to it. The coalition review, the route assessment. Vol 3. She told them that the route was clear, that the assessment had been done by the best people she had ever encountered, and she trusted it, and that the choice of whether to continue was theirs and not hers, and she would support any choice they made. She told them that for those who wanted to go, the 14th Expeditionary had agreed to escort them to Vale 3. The room was very quiet after that. Then a man near the back, older, heavy through the shoulders, a farmer's hands, raised his hand in the traditional Valkyrie gesture of having something to say. "How long?" he said. "How long to Vale 3? "Yes. 4 days at standard transit. With the escort, 3.5. They travel fast." He nodded, looked at the woman beside him. They had a short, private exchange that she could not hear. "We have seeds," he said, "and we have good land waiting. I say we go." The room did what rooms do when a thing has been said that most people in the room were thinking and were waiting for someone else to say first. The quality of the air changed. The exhaling of several hundred people who had been holding the same breath. 247 chose to continue. 13 chose to return home. Isilvan held their hands, one at a time, and told them they had made the right choice, and meant it because there was no wrong choice here, because these were people who had already done something brave just by being on the ship in the first place, and what they did next was their own. They departed Velian Station on the 10th morning. The formation was different for this transit. The 14th did not arrange itself as it had at the debris field, not the precise, tactical dispersal that had made Isilvan's display go quiet with something she had chosen not to name. For this transit, the ships arranged themselves in a pattern she had not seen before, one that the sensor display categorized, after a moment's consideration, as escort formation, civilian protection configuration. Civilian protection configuration. They had a formation specifically for this, for moving alongside something that needed to be kept safe, for traveling at the speed of the thing you were protecting rather than the speed you were capable of. The Endless Mercy moved at the center of it, and 23 ships moved around her, and she watched it on the display for a long time. Lieutenant Commander Osei had come aboard for the transit. Not officially. She had framed it as a medical continuity concern, checking on the patients she had been treating, which was true, and was also transparently a reason she had constructed to be present for the arrival. Isilvan had not challenged this. She had given Osei a cabin and told her the spice bread fabricator was available for personal use. Osei had, in fact, replicated the recipe. She had also taught 3 Valkyrie crew members to make something she called jollof rice using the fabricator's grain settings, and these 3 crew members had taught 4 more, and by the second day of transit the smell of it was in the forward crew quarters and at least 1 meal on the communal dining rotation. The child with the Miru, her name was Sarah, Isilvan had learned, and she was 7.5 and very precise about the half, had attached herself to Osei with the particular determination of a child who has decided that a person is interesting and that following them around constitutes a reasonable life plan. Osei, for her part, had accepted this arrangement with the complete equanimity of someone who had operated in crisis environments long enough that a 7-year-old following her around was categorically manageable. She taught Sarah how to read a medical scanner. Not a real lesson, a version of one, with a scanner set to safe mode, and a Sarah who was very serious about the readings. Isilvan came across them in the medical bay on the second day. Sarah seated on the examination table with the scanner aimed at her own arm, and Osei beside her, walking her through the display, and she stood in the doorway for a moment and decided that whatever she had expected this rescue to look like, it had not looked like this. The good kind of stuck, she thought. Vale 3 appeared on the long-range display on the 4th day, exactly where it was supposed to be, a blue-green world, not remarkable by galactic standards except that it was the place these families had sold their savings to reach, and had nearly died reaching, and were now 2 hours from. Isilvan opened a channel to Mensa. "We have Vale 3 on long range." "We do," he confirmed. 2 hours, 17 minutes at current speed. Atmospheric approach in 3 hours. "The families want to see it," she said. "The display in the main gathering space. Can we route the long-range sensor feed to it?" "Already done," he said. "Your crew authorized it an hour ago. They've been showing it continuously." She closed a channel, walked to the main gathering space. 247 people were standing in front of the display, which was showing a blue-green sphere on a star field, surrounded, visible at the edge of the display, in a sensor feed's wide angle, by the shapes of 23 ships holding formation around the Endless Mercy as she carried them home. Home! Not the home they'd left. The one they'd built the idea of for years, the one that had cost them everything to get to, the one that was still there, still waiting, blue-green, and patient on the display. Sarah was standing in the front row with her Miru. The Miru was no longer drooping. Isilvan stood at the back of the room and watched her people watch their future coming closer. She watched the farmer with the heavy hands put his arm around his wife's shoulders. She watched a young couple hold their child up so the child could see the display. She watched old people and young people and people whose names she was still learning standing in the same room, looking at the same blue-green world, breathing the same recycled air that was starting to smell like jollof rice and spice bread, because these were things that humans and Valkyrie had apparently decided to make together in a ship's galley, and that was, she thought, as good a metaphor as any for what the last 10 days had been. An hour out from atmospheric approach, Mensa called. "Commander, before we hand you off to the Surface Authority, there's something I want you to know. Go ahead. The 14th will run patrol through this corridor for the next 6 months. Standard rotation. The Coalition has formalized it. A pause. You won't see us, but we'll be here." She looked at the display, at the formation around her ship. "You'll be here. Someone has to watch the frequencies," he said simply. She thought about Petra Solano on Meridian 7, watching frequencies for 11 years because she had decided retirement did not change what she was. She thought about 41 hours, about a sector sweep that found an unregistered station in a debris field, about a medic on a floor, and a scanner lesson, and a child's Miru held up. "Captain," she said. "Commander, you are not what I expected." She heard something in his silence. The real kind. The kind that had no performance in it. "I know," he said finally. "We're not usually what anyone expects." "No," she agreed. "I think that is exactly why it works." The Endless Mercy broke atmosphere over Vale. 3 with 23 ships holding position in orbit above her, running their transponders clearly, visible to every sensor on the surface, their formation a clean and deliberate shape against the planet's thermosphere. A shape that said, "We were here." A shape that said, "We came when the beacon went out." A shape that would still be visible on every sensor log of this system's orbital approach for as long as the logs were kept, for as long as any ship in this corridor queried the historical records, for as long as anyone in this sector wanted to know what kind of universe they were living in and what happened when things went wrong in it. The settlers touched down on Vale 3's surface at 1400 local time. The soil was dark and rich, and it smelled, according to the farmer with the heavy hands, who knelt and took a handful of it and held it up to his face, exactly like it was supposed to. Isilvan stood on the surface and looked up at the sky, where she could not see the ships but knew they were there running their quiet orbital patrol, watching the frequencies. She had set her name to each one of the 412. She would say them again tonight, the way her culture required, because they deserved to be said in the place they had been trying to reach. She had 84 children who were alive to grow up in this soil. She had a colony to build. She looked at the sky for one more moment. Then she turned to her people. "Let's get started," she said. "We have work to do." Above her, in orbit, the formation held. Nobody expected them. That was, she had decided, exactly the point.